What is up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, just welcome. My name is Gemma Jade, but today we are going to be discussing real vampires. It's been a while since we touched on my favorite subject in the whole world, real life vampires. I don't mean human beings who parade around getting blood from donors and acting like they're immortal, okay? I'm talking about vampires, ones who roam the earth to this very day, who are exactly like Anne Rice's Lestat. They don't sprinkle, they don't sparkle, and they certainly do not fall in love with high school girls. They are savage and they are beautiful. They're rich beyond compare, and they loathe human beings. I loved the Twilight movies and was even obsessed with True Blood at one point, but there's a feeling I have in my blood and in my bones that is far too hard for me to ignore when it comes to these, the undead. I fully believe that one day they will come out of the coffin, so to speak. Just as we are now understanding more about extraterrestrials and all types of other entities who 50 years ago we thought were nothing more than made-up fantasies and fairy tales meant to give each other a good scare on Halloween or during some slumber party somewhere, we will someday come to find that vampires like Lestat are in fact real, and that they possibly, albeit discreetly and very quietly, run the world. The term vampire wasn't even a part of the English language until the 1700s, when it first appeared in a book called Travels of Three English Gentlemen, which was published in 1746. Despite this, there are legends of these blood-sucking undead that go back to the beginning of time itself. It all goes back, if we're being honest here, to Lilith. As most of you know, I'm writing a book about shadow people, but from what I've come to know in my research and in the work I do with my own abilities outside of YouTube, is more dangerous a bedroom invader than all of the other entities we can name right now put together. She comes in the dead of night, a beautiful and regal woman. She is lust personified and targets men of all shapes, sizes, ages, and occupations. She is indiscriminate in her victims for the most part, as I have heard about a handful of women who have also had encounters with her. She doesn't and never has just wanted the sex and the semen from these men, but their very essence, their life force in the form of their blood. Lilith always causes her victims to become anemic even after just one encounter with her. This is a sure sign that their blood was taken and dangerous levels of it at that. Lilith belongs to the Gnostics and some Christians, but in India, they believe in her as well, only they call her by a different name. She is Vitala in Hindu. Despite these entities, and there are more than one, being spiritual in nature, they were still able to drain the blood of their victims, again, both male and female. Lurking in the shadows of cemeteries and graveyards, they would drain the newly deceased of every single drop of their essence that they possibly could. As soon as they were through and the darkness was fading, these Vitala would quickly dig themselves into holes in the ground, which were promptly covered up, leaving no sign that they were ever there and no way for them to ever be detected by us humans. From what I understand, they were even able to move through the ground like this, and anything living or dead would be drained of every single drop, while these entities, mainly if not exclusively female, would feast on it all in order to live and survive themselves. Thousands of years ago in ancient Greece, there was Empusa. She was very much like Lilith in almost every conceivable way. Beautiful and sexy, but with a lust for blood which was seemingly unquenchable. She was more of a type like we associate with vampires today, at least when speaking of the real ones who still, at least for most of us, only know them in folklore and either pray fervently that they are or aren't real. What is the draw of the blood-sucking undead? The immortality, of course, at least for me. This is what I find most fascinating and most enviable of all of it. Being able to go on and live forever and never having to give up on a dream or be beaten down by life itself. Contrary to popular belief, this does not mean the loss of one's soul, but I will try to get into that before the end of this video. If I can't, I'll mention it again in the next one on vampires. We'll talk about why they do not lose their souls. Empusa took flesh as well as blood and sperm. Zeus himself had a secret love affair with a female vampire, and her name was Lamia. She was especially cruel in that she targeted children, draining them of their blood and devouring their flesh. I can go on and move to Hungary and Scandinavia and Europe and back to the United States. We all have our specific legends, and individually we all believe something slightly different than one another as well when talking about countries and cultures and legends. Really, it's what you make of it. And that's why often I wonder if, perhaps, vampires are real and do roam the streets. perhaps invoked by us humans and Hollywood, making them so appealing to us? Are they totems we have resurrected with the almost worship-like following of the movies about them? The movies that romanticize the bloodsucker and make it glamorous to become an immortal. The Highgate Vampire is another entity which I believe very much existed, but that has been tossed aside as nothing more than the mere paranoia of a town who was at its wit's end and all out of rational solutions and explanations. It was only in the 1960s when this abominable creature was first reported, but I believe it was there for much, much longer, and that it's still there, roaming the area to this very day. I wonder if they have many missing children or animal mutilations in that part of England today, where the Highgate Vampire was. This vampire was reportedly 7 to 8 foot tall, with fierce, burning red eyes and a gaunt, pale face. It wore a long black cloak and skulked among the gravestones late at night. The cemetery itself opened in 1839 in North London and contains both an east and a west cemetery. Now, I've discussed the Highgate Vampire at length in one of my other 2 or 3 videos about real vampires here on this channel. I'll leave the links to those videos in the description box for sure. Like I said earlier, I can go on and on. It seems there is so much information and so many encounters that, if believed, would lead anyone with a rational mind and reasonable thought to surmise that there is such a thing as vampires, but it's all kept so pulled apart, nobody is putting it back together again. It all seems so very random and fantastical, but I assure you, if you can pay close enough attention and get through to the very heart of the encounters and reports, you would see what I'm trying to say, that there are real vampires roaming this very earth right now as the moon stands in the sky and I look out my bedroom window. They're here and they're as real as you and me. Something I have never personally come across, and I feel like that's probably what fascinates me most of all. Aside from, as I said already, the beauty, the riches, the immortality, I'd be okay with staying looking how I look now, only better, and never having to worry about money again for the rest of my very, very long life. The things you would see over centuries if only you had the time. Just imagine it. Let's get into some alleged encounters though, and then you can tell me what you think in the comments below. On May 1st, 1932, there were 2 prostitutes living in a boarding house in the Sankt Eriksplan district of Stockholm, Sweden. Their names were Lily Lindstrom and Minnie Jansen, and they were pretty close friends. Oftentimes, women who are in that line of profession feel a sense of protectiveness over one another, and even a kind of sisterhood a lot of the time as well. It was May Day, and the 2 were discussing their plans for the evening. Lily was 32, Minnie 35 when all of this happened. Now, having a landline phone back then was a really big deal. It was quite uncommon and must have cost a lot of money, especially compared to nowadays. There was only one on the whole floor, as most, if not all, of the women either in the boarding house or on the second floor with Minnie and Lily, they were all prostitutes. They would all get calls at Lily's, as she was the only one with the phone. Her nickname was actually the call girl, ironically enough. I don't think prostitutes were called that back in the 1930s in terms of it being a profession, but I think this is where it might have come from. Girls in boarding houses and the like who would take calls. So anyway, that night Lily took a call from a client she had seen many times before. After no one had seen or heard from Lily after that night, someone called the police and they found Lily dead in her room, the last person to have seen her alive being Minnie. Minnie told investigators that Lily had knocked on her room door twice that night for condoms. The second time was at approximately 9 p.m. and she had noticed that Lily was completely naked underneath a long fur coat. That was the last time anyone would ever see Lily alive again. After calling Lily repeatedly and ringing her doorbell but getting no answer for 3 days, it was actually Minnie who had raised the alarm and called the police. They had to force their way into her little room, or apartment as it was called, and they found Lily lying dead on a chair with the clothes she had been wearing earlier in the evening folded neatly on the sofa right next to her now deceased body. She was the victim of extreme blunt force trauma to the head, but that wasn't necessarily what killed her, and some of the officers at the scene felt this was mainly to incapacitate her. You see, every drop of Lily's blood had been drained from her body. She had been completely exsanguinated, and the killer had used a soup ladle from her kitchen to drink the blood. Despite the authorities' best efforts to keep the death and the cause of it a secret from the press and therefore the public, it leaked, and the killer was nicknamed the, quote, Atlas Vampire, end quote. Her final customer, who was also considered to be her killer, was never found, and I couldn't find any more victims that I could definitely and confidently say belonged to this particular vampiric killer. Normally, despite the camaraderie and aforementioned protective and sisterly nature of prostitutes toward and for one another, There is almost always this extreme code of not only secrecy, but of minding your own business. And I think that even if there were other victims, Lily was probably the first. The police and anyone else involved probably went through further lengths to cover their tracks with the other ones because of the insanity of the reports Lily's death caused. So her being the first victim of the Atlas vampire, and then the police being like, okay, look what happened with this Lily girl who was killed, so let's really keep it under wraps this time. And that might be why there's only one official death, as far as I could tell. The city was in an absolute uproar and scared, but the fact that the murder victim was a prostitute, people felt the tragedy and death wouldn't touch them as long as they weren't women of the night. These ladies were outcast and the heat died down really quickly. I personally believe that's why there are no other reported victims to this particular killer. Nobody cared enough. More recently, in 1984, and much closer to home for me in New Orleans, Louisiana, United States, there was a rash of murders that seemed to have been committed by a vampire. 9 people in total were found dead, men and women alike, throughout various parts of the French Quarter. The cause of death was the same for all 9 in that they had all had their throats torn out. The paramedics who responded to the scene were shocked at the lack of blood compared to the gruesomeness of the scene itself. They thought it very possible that the killer had simply drank the blood directly from the throats he or she had just torn out of the victims right there on the scene. The cases were never solved, and not even a suspect was ever named or considered. Not even a person of interest, but the underground in the city has a way of keeping these things sort of to themselves, even to this day. There was in 1984, and still is, to the best of my knowledge at least, a coven of vampires, if you will, and one of them went rogue and started committing very public murders right out in the open of the streets, like ripping out 9 throats, right? He or she wasn't even hiding the victims or trying to cover up for the cause of death. Take, for instance, the blow to the head Lily received in our previous encounter. I personally believe that was a diversion. You can't just go around making it obvious you're ripping out throats to drink blood, after all. Anyways, it said that whoever this rogue was were killed by the elders and or others in this particular coven. Done deal. That's why there seemed to be no more murders like this one in the city. At least not ones that were so widely reported as these 9 altogether. Also in New Orleans, but a few decades earlier, the police were called to Royal Street in the French Quarter, where they found the bodies of 3 prostitutes. They were found lying in an alley with their throats torn out. They had only been dead a few minutes, yet there was no blood at the scene and no clues were left behind either. There was a witness though. A local who lived above one of the alleyways where one of the victims was found came forward and reported having seen a tall, dark figure wearing an old-fashioned top hat and long coat swiftly get away and climb over a 12-foot fence with great ease. Almost inhumanly so did this killer of women of the night make his escape. None of these murders were ever solved, but for my tastes, they're far too similar. Feeling how I do about coincidences and all, what are the odds? Back in October, I spoke to you guys about the Casket Girls of New Orleans and the Ursuline nuns and convent and all the history there. I talked about where I stand with that particular story and that legend and everything in between. I will leave the link for that one in the description box as well. One more very short encounter before we end. So I'm not sure when this one takes place, but I know it was recently, probably in like the last 20 or 30 years. 3 women were walking past that same Ursuline convent late at night one night. They saw a man standing up high right in front of one of the shuttered windows that are rumored to be how the vampires still to this day get in and out of the convent and into the city to prey on the people who live there. They mainly prey on the tourists though, just saying. They saw this man and immediately thought he was going to jump to his death. And he did jump, but as they screamed and expected him to hit the ground, having seemingly taken his own life by jumping to his death, they watched in shock and disbelief as he flew off. Like, he literally took flight. They were horrified and very confused and weren't sure what it was that they had just witnessed. They kind of quickly put this out of their heads, or at least didn't talk about it with one another until a few nights later when they were walking past the convent again, and that's when they started to discuss the man they had all seen fly off into the night just a few nights before. They couldn't get it off their minds now. However, all of a sudden, after they swear it was all but a blink, there was a man in a cape and a top hat who had so quietly approached them that it was as though he had simply appeared right in front of them with no warning. The man, in some kind of foreign and seemingly ancient accent, asked them if they believed in vampires. Real vampires. The women weren't given a chance to respond to the stranger, however, due to the sound of crashing, like glass breaking, coming from the other side of the street. They all turned to look and saw nothing, and in the seconds it took for them to turn their attention back to the stranger who was asking them the question, he was gone. It was like he had disappeared into thin air. The women to this day are convinced they met a real-life vampire who approached them to look inside of their hearts and see if there were going to be any kind of trouble to him or his kind due to what they had witnessed a few nights before when he had took flight from the balcony up there in the convent. Either that or he was eyeing them to see if one of them had the heart to become like him. They're all still alive, though, at least as best as I can tell, and I believe wholeheartedly, like I said, they had witnessed a vampire in flight that night. I can only wish and hope that I someday come across a man or a woman who one day asks me and approaches me so subtly, asking me gently if I believe in his kind. Who knows what would happen? I've got to get to New Orleans. That's all I have for you today, guys. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Be sure and check out the description box. Give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content, if you enjoyed hanging out with me. Spread the love by sharing this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for donations. Way to donate in the description box: PayPal, Cash App, Patreon. If you donate $20 or more each month to my Patreon, you will automatically receive a 7 to 10 card intuitive oracle reading personal from me each and every month as a thank you, on top of the early release of videos. Guys, Gemma Jade Oracles is opening up. I'm trying to get the domain back from Shopify. It's a whole long mess that I don't need to be explaining at the end of videos. Until then, manifestation sprays, spell jars. I've been sending out kind of bewitching boxes, I call them, with things like resin incense and the charcoal, pillar candles, oracle cards, feathers, all different kinds of incense, sage bundles, offering mixes, soaps, books. I mean, whatever I can fit in there, just kind of a happiness box. And they've been selling, and they've been selling really well. I hope to get reviews up on the website. Gemma Jade Oracles as a business should be here by the end of the week. If not, definitely by the end of next week. No more procrastinating. I got to get my domain name back. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Please be sure and check me out on Wednesday nights with Ghost Dragon ZW from 7:15 to 11:15 p.m. Eastern Time. Live Intuitive Oracle, where I pull one card for anyone and everyone who wants a reading. If you would like to purchase one of my books, I'll leave the links for the Kindle and paperback versions, both Missing the Fae Theory and Encounters with Evil, 101 True and Terrifying Stories, in the description box. If you want a signed copy of either one of those or both of them, please hit me up through email, GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com. If you would like a personal intuitive oracle reading, either remotely or face-to-face, 1 hour, again, hit me up at GemmaJadeParanormal@gmail.com or MoonBearOracle@gmail.com, or for any and all other correspondence. I love hearing from you guys. I'm trying to kind of rush this because I just got done doing Intuitive Oracle, but I wanted to have a video out for you guys since I didn't have one this past Monday because I went on vacation. Thank you guys so much for all of your support, financial and otherwise, your friendships. I love you guys so much. I can't wait to see what the new business brings. I can't wait to see what all the new content brings, all the new friendships, and just the reasoning for all of it in its glory and beauty. Whatever I'm talking about now, I'm just tired, right? I love you guys. Be kind to each other. It doesn't cost anything. Be kind to yourselves more than ever, and never accept anything less than others being kind to you. Always go in grace. Smile at a stranger, and I'll see you guys next time.